Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 51. It's going to be 3 tanks replays for you today, and although I struggled at first to think of a kind of a linking theme for the replays, because what I do is I pick out the replays based on who they're from, and then I try and think of something that connects them somehow. And then I realised that they actually do have a connection, and the thing that connects them is that all 3 of these replays are going to show an example of things that bug me. And this first one is almost a reprise of things that bug me that I talked about recently, because it's premium ammo in this particular replay that we're seeing here, Sebedy in the Type 5 Heavy. And of course we had that VK game from Flying Elite not long ago where he was firing all APCR. In this case, it's actually a bit worse somehow from a game design point of view, because the premium HE on the Type 5 Heavy has basically no downsides apart from being more expensive. With APCR premium, in fact just APCR shells generally, and with heat, you at least have some theoretical marginal downsides. With APCR it has a reduced normalization range, and even though the shell velocities are generally faster, the shell speed also falls off quicker, although, as I say, it's marginal. Most of the time those things don't matter. With heat, of course, you don't lose any penetration over distance, but you do have the possibility of, if you hit spaced armor, just nothing happening at all. So again, it's something you can overcome by learning to aim at non-spaced armor, and sometimes RNG might put it into the spaced armor anyway, but as I say, both marginal issues, not things that generally speaking are major inconveniences with either of those types of premium ammo. This, however, there's no downside, there's none. It's just more expensive, and that's it. It just straight up does more damage. Which is, yeah, it's a little bit imbalanced, it's a little bit broken from a game design point of view, because it's just better, it's just flat out better. And you could, in theory, absolutely do the same thing with some other kinds of premium ammo, because there are a very few examples where, you either get more damage for less pen or less damage for more pen, and in Blitz, actually, they've implemented this as a design choice. I forgot to completely mention World of Tanks Blitz in that previous video, but they've done that, and it works just fine. So what you could do, you could have the 400 extra average damage per HE shell, but instead of the 75 average pen that the regular HE gets, you could knock it all the way down to like 10 or less. So yeah, you'll get more splash, but you're pretty much never going to pen anything with those shells except the most thinly armoured targets. So that's a thing you could do, just, as an idea. Or else you could make the, I don't know, you could make them really slow compared to the normal shells or something. But as it is, it's just a straight upgrade, completely straight upgrade, and it's only times like that when you fire into the end of a gun barrel or something that it's going to do no damage. So enough about the premium ammo. That's my bugbear that is covered in this particular game. As to why Sebedy's using it, I mean, why not? It's kind of like the Hesh shells for the British 183mm guns. It's there, it's basically a straight upgrade, so why not? And at least those 183mm guns have occasions when you would want to use an AP shell, for example. Or maybe an HE shell, but generally speaking the Hesh is just better than the HE on those tanks. So they at least have some choices you have to think about. Not so much with this tank though. So yeah, a bit of a design failure there, but when you're playing through it, you might as well. The only thing that's holding you back is your own willingness to do so, and if you're facing a tough situation, or even if you're just having a bad day, maybe you've had a string of bad games, it's like, well, why not? Just go for it. And in Sebedy's case here, we can see he does actually have half and half of regular and premium, but he's just chosen to go down the route of all premium because he can do that. It's fine, it's allowed. So why not? So he's racked up about 2,000-ish damage so far, a bit over, but as you can see, I mean, you know, each team's lost about half, but they absolutely are being held back by the camping enemy tank destroyers. Which is actually, that's kind of another bugbear of mine, is that campy gameplay, which we're going to see more fully covered in the next replay that I've chosen, from the point of view of the person playing. In this case, it's somebody playing against it, and although he has got pretty good armour, he's still lost about half of his hit points already, so he can't be completely gung-ho here. I mean, we can see the Stridswagen 103 is firing premium themselves, which is, in the context of firing at this thing, with its monstrously thick armour, fair enough. So he's got himself into a position where he is protected from the side. The other Type 5 has been taken out by the Scorpion G, so it's just the T95 hanging on down there alone. The good news is, though, if they can take out the T34-100, that removes some of the enemy vision from the middle. And at that point, it's just a matter of trying to spot those tank destroyers before they get killed by them. There's also artillery in play, and there we go, there's the T44-100 out, but they know roughly where the artillery is, so actually spotting the artillery shouldn't be too difficult. Now interestingly, the WZ is approaching along the coastline. If I were in their shoes, I would maybe have tried to get to the high ground, because of course on this map there's that natural ledge for tank destroyers to use, which if you look on the mini-map, and bearing in mind this is I think a slightly older replay, I think this is 919. It might have been removed since then on Cliff. But it's one of those maps where you can do a thing on one side but you can't do it on the other. There's no corresponding high ground at the back there that tank destroyers on the south can use. So it's not an equal map in that regard. So they've taken out the Scorpion. And there's artillery, who got spotted and did have a pop at Sebedy, but Sebedy had more than enough hit points to absorb it. So that just leaves this Stridswagen left. And although the scout is down, you know, they outnumber him 3-1. So if they can just, there we go forwards, and Sebedy can afford to take the hit, and actually then is able to get the kill as well. But even if somehow he died, if he'd been detonated or whatever, the AT-15 would have been able to finish off the job. So that was an ace tanker, a steel wall, and a high caliber, and full premium HE all the way, because why not? It's part of the game design, you guys. It's fully intended that people should be able to do this. Oh, the Type 5 is so bad, though. Yeah, as you can see, he did pretty well at the end of that, over 4,000 damage done, 1,300 base XP. The AT-15 actually came second place, which slightly surprised me. The other Type 5 Heavy did alright as well, the Scout did alright, so yeah, there was a fair few people doing okay in that one. Unsurprisingly, on the enemy team, the tank destroyers were quite well represented at the top there, but well, in that kind of situation when you can just sit at the back and kind of rack up the damage, what do you expect? So we've gone from tier 10 to tier 8, and this is Menthel in the Stridswagen S1. Yes, it's the S1, because the Udes is the regular one, isn't it? Yes. I can never remember which one's the premium and which one's the non-premium, but this is the premium version. So this is like those high-tier, air quotes, tank destroyers that are in fact MBTs. One of those Swedish designs that gets the sniper mode, and with the sniper mode comes a vast increase, well, I say vast, a pretty big increase in things like your rate of fire, your aim time, your reload, but a vast increase, that's a word, in your mobility. So you have to basically toggle back and forth, and the fact that these are also, in World of Tanks terms, very, very thinly armoured machines, practically speaking, at the tiers that they're at, there are probably more guns that can pen them than not. It means they have to be very cautious, they have to be very campy, they have to stay out of sight. So this is another one of those bugbears of mine about World of Tanks that has kind of been, I mean, back and forth over the years, and they've made changes to things like the spotting mechanics behind bushes and the loss of camo of tank destroyers and stuff like that to try and combat it. And they've even, over the years, changed the maps themselves to change how much bush cover there is. But then they go and add these Swedish TDs, which are all about just doing this, basically. They completely exemplify it, and what we're going to see in this replay from Menthel is a very good example of a fairly optimal situation. Now, this is Derpenberg. They've lost nearly half the team already, and it's not looking that good, but now the enemy team is in a position of, well, they have to push. And, of course, on Derpenberg, there are some eminently defensible positions on either side of the river. You've got the choke points of the river crossings themselves, and then, of course, at the back of each east-west side, you've got that high ground, which you can use to defend. And in the case of this southern cap, you've actually got this dip here that's near the cap. So you can do what Menthel and this VK are doing. On the other side, it's more of a bit of high ground that you can use. But either way, this is a slightly more symmetrical map in that regard than Cliff is. So he can just sit here and do this, and the enemy team is going to have a really hard time crossing. And breaking this sort of deadlock on Derpenberg is actually really hard to do. It becomes just incredibly drawn out and painful, and you might start with the kind of numbers advantage that enemy team has, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because they've still got to get across the river. They've still got to somehow break those defensive positions, which means crossing open ground under fire. And what's more likely to happen is that they will try and, you know, outspot things firing at them and just get taken apart in the process. So that just means Menthel can sit here and do this. And this is all part of the design, you know. It was kind of one of the reasons why I never went down the Waffenträger line when that was introduced, because that was a whole line of thinly armoured tank destroyers that relied on not being ever seen, which is not particularly an interesting playstyle to me. And then they made a line that was even more so in the form of the Swedish so-called tank destroyers. Well, so-called at the higher tiers, because of course the low and mid tiers actually genuinely are tank destroyers. So, doesn't quite get the kill on the Scorpion G, but hey, this is Derpenberg, so you can guess what's going to happen next, right? Scorpion G drowned. Yep, this is turning out to be a proper classic Derpenberg match. I mean, I've talked about the tank destroyers themselves, but you could also maybe say that the map design on some of the maps, some of the long-standing maps, even some of the newer maps, is sometimes not that good either. And I maybe give Wargaming more of a pass with this, because designing good maps that promote engaging gameplay, even when you have inherently campy lines of machines such as the Swedes, it's actually really hard to do. And there have been numerous examples over the years of you know, they've leaked out pictures of different maps that they've been working on that have just never made it to the game because they were in no way balanced. So Menthel did a thing here. He backed all the way to this corner, which I'm not convinced was a great idea, giving up that position. But if he did have to back up, I think getting to where the T-54 is would have been much better. But as it is, when T-10 makes a surprise push over that saddle there, over that the low point of that hill, he's actually in a position to respond relatively quickly, although his first two shots do leave a little to be desired. I think that that one could have been aimed a little bit better, but he's now more solidly aimed at the pike nose. Actually, I think retracts the T-10 there, and they are able to kill him. So 11-10, they've actually swung it back in their favour at this point, and that's because the enemy team had to push across the river on Derpenberg, and that's how it goes. So there goes the WZ-111, and surprise, there's the Chrysler. He could have easily held his position in the dip, I feel. I'm not quite sure why he backed off so hastily, but as it is, it didn't really matter. It's worked out anyway, and he has lost some health, but he's also racked up a pretty appreciable amount of damage in the process. That is, however, the last of the damage he's going to get. The 704 got taken out by the T54, and, well, it looks like the Stridswagen is going to be the one to get the kill, the 103 on the Moistchen, but as it is, it's actually the T25 Pilot 1. So there's an ace tanker, high caliber tank sniper, and a Confederate with nearly 5,000 damage done and another 2,700 assisted. So that's not half bad. And nearly 1,500 base XP. Now the T-54 did almost as much damage, but I think because he got all that spotting and tracking damage, he was by far the star of the show in terms of the result. But it really was a perfect scenario for this kind of tank destroyer. And so when you see the Swedish tank destroyers and even some of the Waffenträgers doing really, really well, it will tend to be matches like this because this is where they shine. In other scenarios, they do much less well, and it's just how they are, basically. So if you've seen replays like that before, it's just the nature of the thing, essentially. So lastly, we come to this replay, and this one is going to be a little unusual. It is another Swedish tank, and it's driven by Iron Man, and neither of those things are unusual, but I've decided not to edit this one at all, and also there's going to be some music later, because you really have to just watch the whole of this unexpurgated to get the full effect. Now there's a couple of things to note. The main one, I think, that's important is that the enemy team has a whole bunch more heavy tanks, including top tier heavies. Iron Man is basically replacing a tier 7 heavy, but the good news is he's got a pretty nice gun on the Leo. He's hitting people for consistently over 300 damage, and he's going to need to do that damage because the enemy team's IS-2 and T-29 also have very nice guns. Not to mention they've also got a KV-85. The KV-1s may be a bit less important in this context damage-wise, but you know, they're still alright as well. On their own side, they've got a KV-1 and an OI Experimental, and the OI Experimental hasn't even moved yet. So the enemy team has an armour and hit points advantage and an alpha advantage as well. But, of course, even though it doesn't look great from a team list point of view, in terms of the hand that matchmaking has dealt them, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the players. And this is my third bugbear. This is going to be nothing to do with anything wargaming. You know, the first two replays were about design decisions that wargaming has taken over the years. But the third one is, to be fair, completely out of wargaming's control, and it is other players. How it is other players, you're going to see exactly over the course of this replay, because I'm honestly, I nearly sent this to Jingles. Like, I honestly nearly didn't feature this on my own channel. It's of that level. I mean, this maybe gives you some forewarning. In fact, I'm tempted to say that I have a strong recommendation right now that you go and grab yourself a bottle of whiskey, because you're going to need it later on. There's also going to be some music later as well, so if you're a fan of classical music, it might be rather good. But I don't know, maybe that might be an off-putting thing for some people, but those people are heathens and Philistines, yes. So, they've taken out the T-29 at least, which is not so bad, but they've lost the T-20 already, so that's not so good. The enemy team is also firmly in control of the important area of the map, but they can still work their way down from here, potentially. So Iron Man's moved up, and they've taken out that Su-85. There's also a couple of tank destroyers there, which is not so welcome, but they're not focusing on him at the moment. They do seem to have been concentrating on that M5 Stuart that was trying to spot from the middle. So he's been spotted again, but it's at the point where he's at. He's reached cover, and he's also found the enemy artillery, so that's rather nice. So there's one down, and this is where that high alpha comes in, especially nice, because he can just one-shot these tanks, these artillery pieces, without having to reach for a second shell. And in the case of the M12, he's actually reloaded an HE just for the purpose, so he's not having to use one of his somewhat limited stock of AP shells, because that's the downside of having a rather, you know, hard-hitting gun on a medium tank. You don't necessarily get a lot of ammunition to go with it. So a nice big hit into that T-34-85, who has rather taken notice of him being there, and in fact he's just taken a hit from both of those tanks. Actually no, I tell a lie, one of those hits was from a Hellcat. It wasn't actually the M42, but it was worth it, and because the Hellcat, as it turns out, has the 76mm gun, although it was maybe a little unwelcome discovering that the Hellcat is in a position to actually hit him from back there, it's not as unwelcome as it would have been had the Hellcat had the 90mm gun. It would have hurt a lot worse. So that's that taken care of. That's his 7th kill, and the enemy team is down to now only 4 tanks. This is looking pretty good. He's done over 2,500 damage, and it's on track for, you know, 1 more kills of Radley-Walters. It's on track for what looks like should be a pretty nice carry. But I might have slightly already given away the game that that's not what this replay is going to be about. So the Hellcat's very low health, in fact Hellcat is now dead thanks to the E25, who is making a move, and if they can get at this KV-85 in a pincer, and get the IS-2 in a pincer, that would be fantastic. They could break this right now. Now if the Skoda T25, the T24 and the Chernukai all push together down the central path while they're doing this, they could have this right now. They could take out the KV-1 and then storm the IS-2 together. Instead, the Skoda T24 has gone all the way up north, and the Skoda T25 is at least trying, but the Chernukai is completely hanging back. And if you recognise that music, by the way, well, it is rather a famous piece, but A, it was in the YouTube music library and therefore I can use without copyright issue, and B, I felt it was rather fitting. So that was an excellent opportunity to win the game right there that has completely slipped through their fingers because of these medium tanks, essentially. The T25 made a go of it, but they didn't have any support, and the Skoda T24, I don't know why they're driving all the way around like that, but it's not doing them any good. And I think because the T24 has now turned up at that corner, I mean, Island Man, the sensible thing to do would have been to get out of there to reposition, because he's in a medium tank, and instead he has made a fatal decision. He decided to stick around and maybe try and take out that KV-1, which he wasn't able to do, but unfortunately that has put him in a rather bad position, because now he's screwed. He can't get away, and it's actually the KV-1 that kills him, because the T24 didn't even, the T25 even wasn't able to kill him. The Chernukai does, but the Chernukai is now also in serious trouble, and meanwhile the Skoda T24 is doing not a lot. But Jedi, I hear you say, there's still artillery. Yeah. Well, the OI Experimental, still AFK. The M12 has managed to somehow flip themselves on their side. Now, I think they probably just did it in artillery view, where they were turning and physics happened, essentially. So, at this point, I'm just going to let the music take over, because it's all downhill from here, and it is spectacular. Completely spectacular. So, you know how I said have that whiskey ready? Yeah, you're going to need it. So, did you finish your whiskey? I know I did. Though, of course, I had to watch this multiple times, so there's that. Feel pity for me, please do. But more so feel pity for Island Man, because he had to sit and watch that happen live. Now, what's maybe the most remarkable thing about this game is, they almost won anyway. If that M12 had had better RNG on that final shot and had been even able to splash the IS-2 with his paltry 37 hit points, that would have won the game in spite of the multiple other points of failure. But because we came down to that RNG roll of the dice and because RNG said no, it ended up being a win for nobody, because the IS-2 was never going to be able to win that. You might have noticed that IS-2 ended up with 8 kills there. Island Man also had 8 kills. That's a pretty rare sight, a double Radley-Walters, one on each side. And, well, for those other multiple points of failure, I did already point out, as it happened, the missed opportunity with the medium tanks faffing around and failing to kill that KV-1 and then use their numbers advantage against the IS-2. That could have ended the game right there. We, of course, had the OI Experimental, who was AFK the entire time, but still got 86 XP, because you can just not move a muscle and still get XP in World of Tanks. That's one of the nice things in warships. People that don't move all game get literally nothing. Nada. Not a single credit, not a single point of XP. So, yeah, they don't help the team, but they get no reward for it whatsoever. But anyway, so, you know, being 14 tanks versus 15, that didn't help. And then, of course, there was Mr. Dunning-Kruger in the AMX-13F3, who just blew my mind, quite frankly. Absolutely 100% Dunning-Kruger effect right there, a prime example. If you noticed on the score screen, they performed really very poorly. The M12, once the Chernukai had realised and come back to help them, was actually then able to try and make that comeback and nearly won the game for them. The AMX-13F3 was directly working against the team and just being a complete jerk in the process. And on the score screen, unsurprisingly, perhaps they did very, very poorly, even though, you know, they were clearly not using the top gun on that thing. But still, yeah, they were not helping the team to win. They were actively trying to help the team lose. But naturally, of course, it was everybody else's fault when they did, because clearly it was nothing to do with them or their actions in that game. So, with the best will in the world, with the best design decisions in the world, of course, this is a multiplayer game, and wargaming is never going to be able to make the players themselves perfect. They could make the game perfect, and even if they had made the game perfect, you would still have matches like this. It's just the nature of the thing, basically. So, as I said, the first 2 replays are all about things that wargaming have done with tanks that I personally don't like, but this last one is unavoidable in any multiplayer game, really. There's always going to be people that are not the best players, people that are being jerks, and sometimes you get this confluence, this perfect storm of utter... I don't even have the word to describe this, but yeah, it was a bit painful to watch. So yeah, hopefully it was enjoyable in a weird, perverse way, even so, because there was a certain magnificence about it, wasn't there? It was a kind of inevitable level of face palm and, oh my god, is this really happening? And it was wonderful and magnificent in its own way. It's just that way was particularly terrible. So, yes. Hopefully this video brought you something. It made you feel some kind of emotion. It might not necessarily have been a good emotion, but that's what the whiskey is for, right? So if you did indeed feel some kind of emotion, you can hit the like button. You can leave any comments below, and I'm sure there will be 1 or 2. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.